and welcome. You're watching India Revival Mission on Times Network. I'm Heena Gambhir, and today we are joined by former NITI Aayog Vice Chairman Arvind Panagariya. So thank you very much for speaking with us here on India Revival Mission. Firstly, I want to ask you about Budget 2021. 3 things that you just loved in the budget and 3 things which disappointed you.
That's a good question. This 3 and 3 spooks me out a bit. But all right, I think first of all, the budget does provide substantial sum both for vaccine and stimulus, which is one of the things I have been asking for. Second, the budget also announces an incredibly terrific public sector enterprise policy. This is about privatization of public sector units. Although this is a different kind of policy in its potential impact, it is of roughly the same magnitude as the industrial policy of 1991. Okay. It may be a little bit of exaggeration, but I think that is how important I think it is if it is actually implemented. Third, I would pick that the government has taken a very important step towards financial sector strengthening. Because in the short and intermediate run, that was extremely important. So the announcement to create an ARC plus about 20,000 crore rupees for recapitalization, those are also very good steps. I could add to that, obviously, strengthening of the financial sector also involves the announcement of privatization of 2 banks. This is going to be quite unprecedented because these are going to be the nationalized banks, and for that legislative change would be required.
Okay.
Plus that insurance company also that the government has announced to privatize. So those are the 3 major steps I would say are positive. But on the negative side, the tariffs have gone up again. Some tariffs have been brought down, but by and large, the impact of the changes announced on tariffs would be to raise the tariffs rather than lower on average. And that sort of is a continuation of the import substitution policy, which I have repeatedly said that, this is perhaps a mistake for us to do.
Okay.
So that's really the main thing. The other things are issues which are of absence, right? I mean, and that is simply understandable because you cannot load up too many things in a single year. But certainly, for example, we would need direct tax reform down the road. What we did in the corporate profit tax is something we need to think about doing in the direct tax reform as well, meaning bringing the rates down and ending all the exemptions. So we need the cleanup there also. So those are the things which I think you could ask for.
Okay, so let's now talk about the specific announcements that were made in Budget 2021 by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Government has got a big disinvestment plan again for FY22. Opposition's argument here is that NDA is selling family silver. What is your opinion, sir?
Yeah, no, I think this is a perennial argument that continues to be made, and it's completely misguided, sometimes bordering on shenanigans. Because, yes, the government would be selling assets, but it will also be acquiring assets. So it's not as though assets are being blown up to, as in a household situation, we would say selling the silver to, blow it up on alcohol or something. I mean, that's not what the government is doing. The government is swapping one form of asset for another form of asset. So the proceeds will go into either infrastructure or they will be spent on education, they will be spent on health or defense. In every one of these cases, you are building up your assets. So, it is exchanging one form of assets for another form with huge improvement in efficiency. because infrastructure, health, education, defense, these are things that the government ought to do, and only the government can really do, particularly when it comes to things like defense or public health, or infrastructure. Private sector can't do this. Maybe in some of this the private sector can participate and does participate, but largely these are items we see as something that the government ought to do. But manufacturing, which is entirely profit-driven activity, is really not for the government. So any manufacturing that serves no public purpose. So if some manufacturing serves a public purpose, as for example in some of the defense manufacturing, we think that it serves a public purpose, maybe that's fine. But large whatever the government wants to sell now is all about profit making, and has nothing to do with the public good or public spending. It's entirely an activity that ought to be in the private sector. So government is 100% right, in my opinion.
What do you make of the bold fiscal deficit target that the government has set? Did you expect 9.5% for FY21?
Okay, so on the first one, the 9% plus deficit, that's something that has largely happened. It's only the last quarter which is still on, the January-March quarter.
Yes.
And the deficit really means is in the last quarter, January to March, the government of India will be spending almost twice of what it spent in the same quarter last year in 2020. So it is an ambitious kind of spending target. So, will they succeed in spending twice of what they spent last year? Maybe. But certainly I think it's a good ambition. And if they fall short, there is no harm. Deficit will be correspondingly reduced by a few, 0 point some percentage points. So I think that's all fine. We do need the stimulus at this stage, and therefore in terms of do I endorse what the government has decided to spend in this particular quarter? Yes, I think it's a good idea. Roadmap for the future, they are reducing this to about 6% plus, 6.5 or so in the FY22, and that again, contains some bit of a stimulus. There is no doubt. This was not the original plan. And that stimulus is needed. What I would suggest also is, try to front load some of the expenditures rather than wait till third and fourth quarter. Bring some of these expenditures to the first quarter of the fiscal year, and that will give them also some opportunity to reassess, how much stimulus is needed, and for sure they can choose to fall short of the fiscal deficit target. If they end up with 5% or 5.5%. That's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Okay. Now, health and infra actually took center stage this time in the budget because it came in the time of coronavirus. Do you see them, if not solving, but at least addressing the immediate issues of demand and unemployment in the country?
Look, in a longer term sense, we are very far from solving all the problems. Our per capita income is still below $3,000 per year, and we need to get to a decent number like 10,000 somewhere. So, all problems we're not going to solve, but the government has to do the best it can within the revenues that it has available. And on that count, if we assess, I think the government has tried to push the envelope. 34% increase in infrastructure spending and 137% in health spending.
Right.
Those are pretty ambitious targets. Infrastructure we need to continue to build. I think there's a lot to be done. So all, very welcome to see the infrastructure expenditure expand. Health, we have been very underspent. Public health, even if going to hospitals, etc., we are willing to leave to the private sector plus public sector, which is what we are doing through Ayushman Bharat. with some, for the poor assistance provided, which also is being done under Ayushman Bharat. But if the provision of these services we want to leave to the private sector to some degree, that's perfectly quite okay. But public health, the government has to do, and vaccination, for example, that is one of the prime examples of public health intervention, which should come from the government. So I'm glad, even before the budget, I was pitching that the government ought to spend $5 to $10 billion on this. Government has allocated $5 billion and said it would be willing to do more if necessary. So that's the right thing to do. And other part of the health budget also goes into bringing clean drinking water through piped water. That is again a very important public health objective, public health service that the government ought to do. So I think these are all in the right track, in the right direction.
How do you see, sir, the 12 lakh borrowing target for second year in a row? In FY21, this kind of a borrowing target, we can still understand was needed because of coronavirus and the kind of situation that we were all into. But why the similar kind of a target for FY22?
Okay. So first of all, we do need to broaden the revenue base. And this is where, earlier when I said, for instance, the direct tax reform, not only we need to end the exemptions, rationalize the tax rates, but we also need to work a lot more towards broadening the tax base. So certainly in the tax revenues, we need to do that. Now, the borrowing for the fiscal year 22, it seems to me, there was an agreement on the side that the government ought to do a bit more in terms of spending.
Okay.
The government has been largely, by the way, very conservative. It has set pretty tight fiscal deficit targets in the past and actually adhered by that. So adhered to that. So this was an unusual year. And now that, I was not in favor of any kind of stimulus early on. Okay. Other than what was required to provide food and shelter to everybody. But now that people are returning to workplaces and the vaccine is being made available progressively, we would be able to bring everybody to work, and therefore some demand help can help. Private sector is still sort of has some excess capacity, and its investment demand will really begin to take off only after the excess capacity comes to full use. Okay. In the interim, I think the government has to step in, and which is exactly what the purpose of this extra deficit and extra borrowing from the market is.
Okay. A number of times you've spoken about the need for direct tax reforms. Here in India, the middle class was a bit disappointed with no tax relief. Do you think something should have been done for the salaried class too?
Was it necessary? In the longer run, certainly, we need, as I have said, some sort of direct tax reform to take place. Whether the government, wants to do it this year or next to next, that's a judgment, to some degree there has to be a political judgment. How much do you want to take on to in a given single year? This year is going to be a transition year, and I understand that, all of us have suffered. Even the United States, at Columbia, we have taken some cut in our salaries. Some hardship to everybody. But that's what one has to really be prepared for in a crisis. I'm not, I want the reform to happen, but the fact that it is not happening this year is not so good, because lots and lots of things which I felt that the government needed to do and have written about for almost 20 years been done during Modi 2.0, including the labor law reforms, the farm bills, etc., which were done well before the budget, of course. Also, the cut in the corporate profit tax that was also done before the budget. So many, many things that I've been writing on for almost 20 years have not been done. So one can't be too much more demanding on the government in one single year.
Okay. And finally, sir, India has also decided to have a bad bank to solve the bad loan crisis. In 2017, if I recall correctly, you said in one of your interviews that bad bank is not really needed to solve India's loan mess. What is your view today, and what else can Indian government really do to help solve this bad loan mess?
So, by the way, if you go further back, you'll see somewhere, well, maybe it was not reported in that way because, I was inside the government, and usually I did not speak about what discussions I was having internally. But I was the first in the government actually in 2015 to push for an ARC or asset reconstruction company or bad bank. At that time, we did not even have the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So I saw, and if you go back, in the India Today magazine, I'd written the cover story somewhere in August 2014, or maybe July 2014, somewhere there. There's a whole cover story on the economy just around the budget time. There I had said that the NPA problem is one of the serious problems which needs to be addressed urgently. But once the IBC was in place, I felt that the process, and so the 2017 interview that you're referring to perhaps is after that, and then I felt that we then could actually follow the basic market process that every other country follows. That if there are bankruptcies, you take them to the bankruptcy court. And even now, we could have done it that way. In which case, though, in fairness, the recapitalization monies would have had to be much bigger. Right now, the government has allocated about 20,000 crore rupees. And absent a bad bank, there is no way that 20,000 crore rupees would have been anywhere near being sufficient. So the government, I think, has chosen the middle path, a little bit of recapitalization, but mostly relying on a bad bank to take out the bad assets from the books of the public sector banks. So that's an alternative, but to the extent that, I was arguing that we need to move in advance rather than wait, because I had in mind exactly the older situation that in 2015 we waited and did not start the process till middle to late 2017. And we suffered. The decline in the growth rate that happened in 2019-20 to about 4.2% was precisely the result of the weaknesses in the financial sector that crept in because of the NPA problem. The credit growth had suddenly declined very dramatically. So the situation that needed to be avoided, and the government has actually moved in advance. But what is also important for the government is to move quickly to set up this ARC.
Okay. Lastly, sir, on one hand, while Modi government is being appreciated globally for its bold reforms, but on the other hand, there are many roadblocks within the country that Modi government is facing, be it the issue of land reforms or the much-awaited farm laws. We all know what is happening on the ground. What is your point of view on this?
Yeah. My assessment is that our perceptions are very much governed by what is visible, and we really don't see the invisible. What do I mean by that? Well, farm protests were visible. The government could not get enough votes to pass the Land Acquisition Amendment Act in 2015. That is visible to us. What is not visible is that all the other reforms, and there are tons and tons of things that we have done since 1991, were passed. There were no protests. They went through. People were happier. The economy did better. Poverty saw a massive decline. All of that happened. Only the economists know it, who study these things. But everything, but the public perception is totally then dominated by what we see on the Delhi border currently, or what we saw on So I'm not so pessimistic. I think this is an issue that the government is not going to politically resolve. Not it's really investment into political rather than but how navigate. But I'm personally very happy that that did not dampen the spirit of the Prime Minister and his government to move forward with reforms, and they really presented an incredibly honest in spite of the conflicts that
Okay.
By the way, on that, if I may add,
Yes, sir.
if I may add, remember that alongside, in parallel with the farm bills, the government also passed 4 major labor codes. And those are the reforms which, like the farm reforms, were awaited for 30 years. In fact, discussion on labor laws had actually started, reform of labor laws had started back in 1991 when the first set of reforms were being done. So, whereas for the farm bills that started around 2000, about 10 years later, so the history of reform, of the need for reforms having been recognized is older actually than that for farm bills. And yet, they were done just now. Everybody thought if Vajpayee government had actually around 2001 or 2002 mooted the idea, they did discuss labor law reforms, but then found that there were not enough support for them, so they didn't do it. So in some ways, this was a more contentious issue, but largely I think this has been unimplemented. So nobody seems to know it other than me. It's not, this is where we have to, we economists have to observe both what is visible and what is not visible.
All right, Professor Panagariya, thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on India Revival Mission. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much, sir.